All right, so now this is recording, and we're going to go ahead and begin. I'm assuming that you read on Duxter's about the Persian Wars. Okay, so I'm going to sum up real quick about the Persian Wars, simply because we already studied the Persian Wars earlier when we studied Persia. But to sum up, there were two Persian wars. Persia wanted to fight the Greeks, wanted to conquer the Ionian Greeks, I apologize. And Athens sided with the Ionians because they were colonists of Athens. And they did business with Athens. And the Persians defeated the Ionian Greeks. That's part of that you have to know. The Ionian Greeks were off the coast of Turkey, on the other side of the Aegean Sea from the rest of Greece. And then the Persians wanted to exact revenge on Athens in particular, but all the Greek city-states. They're in the Balkan Peninsula, including those of the Peloponnesian Peninsula and Sparta. So it's important to point out that Athens and Sparta, they were separate countries. Even though they're both Greek, they're separate countries. Like I said earlier, Greece was a lot like what we would consider Latin America today. There are a lot of different countries in Latin America, but they have a similar culture, a similar language, a similar religion. Sorry, it's hard to talk with this mask on. And the Persians, under King Darius, attacked Athens at the Battle of Marathon and lost. You guys read about that. This is just a review, so I'm not going detail by detail here. But the reason, Marathon is 26.2 miles away from Athens, and the reason I know that is because we run the marathon today in honor of Euripides' run from the Battle of Marathon, which, by the way, he did that after fighting a battle. And then arriving in Athens to tell everybody that they were safe. He's considered a hero. He tragically died after running that distance to let the people of Athens know they were safe. Today, the marathon is run in his honor. Well, 10 years later, there's a new Persian king. His name is King Xerxes. I had a kid yesterday when I did this discussion. King Xerxes. Okay, I thought it was kind of cool. And reviewing all this, King Xerxes came up, and again, the Greek city-states all unified together against the Persians. They fought a courageous battle at the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 Spartans gave their lives so that the people of Athens and Sparta could leave their city-states and march to Salamis. When the Persians eventually, after 3 days, defeated the 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae Pass, they march to Athens. When they get there, they find nobody's there. And so they burn everything and, the whole jazz with that. And then they then get on their boats and they go to attack the Athenians and Spartans at Salamis. And there, what the Greeks did, the Athenians had a great navy, the Spartans had a great army. So, upon each Athenian boat, there were Spartan soldiers, and when the Athenian boats rammed into the Persian boats, the Spartan soldiers would jump off the boat and attack the Persians and do the hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, the Athenians took care of the navy. And when Persian ships sank, of course, the men abandoned ship and they swam to shore where Spartan soldiers were waiting for them to slaughter them. And long story short, the Greeks defeated the Persians. Now, that's the quick version of it. You were supposed to read about it. And we also studied it earlier when we studied Persia earlier this year. So the feigned retreat and all that jazz, we also learned about as well. Simply put, Greece enters its golden age after the Persian Wars. And Persia never formally attacks all the Greek city-states again. They will side with Sparta against Athens eventually. We're going to talk about that today. So during the Peloponnesian Wars, Sparta and Athens will eventually go to war with each other. And the Greek world is going to have to choose one side or the other. But there was 50 years there between the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars. And that time period is the time period we think of with traditional Athens. It's the way we think about it, with the Parthenon and the Agora, and Athens being this great place, and the temple of Zeus and Athena. It's this time period we think of. And Athens develops a democracy, a direct democracy, where every male citizen voted on everything, which is going to be different than the democracy the Romans will have later, called a republic, or an indirect democracy. So let's go to slide 2, please. Yep. Slide 2, and go ahead and fill out slide 2. Should look like this. Yep, it'll just go out in pieces like that. There you go. All right, and every time I say go to the next slide, just go ahead and fill it completely out. Okay. Anyway, during this golden age of Athens, Greek art and science expand greatly. You have Greek philosophers like Socrates come into being during this time period. And you have great Greek mathematicians come during this time period. This is the time when Athens is dominating the Aegean world, or the Eastern Mediterranean basin. It's not a long period of time. The classical age of Greece is really just that 5th century BC. And yet that 5th century BC is going to have so much of an impact on us today. So it's important that you understand that little part. And the city-states all align together because even though Persia didn't go back and attack all the Greeks again, they were still a very real threat. It wasn't like Persia was some weakling. Athens and the Greeks basically were able to defeat the Persians because the Persians weren't used to fighting in the landscape where Greece was. They were used to fighting in the open plains of Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. And their fighting style was not particularly well in the tight coast and tight valleys of the Balkan Peninsula. And frankly, the Greeks knew this. So they combined together to form the Delian League, not as one country, but much like we would have NATO or some other political pact where we agree to fight together. And the Delian League paid tribute to Athens to build up her navy. Now, not each individual city-state, but all the city-states combined, Athens would receive in today's money over $200 million worth of silver and gold per year. That's a lot, especially considering they are coming from the city-states. City-states are small countries, folks. They're not big countries. They're sending a lot of moolah for the Athenian Navy to protect all of them. That's the deal. And Athens was supposed to spend all that moolah on her navy. Well, the first thing Athens does is kind of a gray area. Like the city-states, well, we really agreed for you to build your boats, but Athens was like, well, but we really need this wall that's going to go build around our city, and then it's going to surround the road that goes from the harbor to our city, because it's 7 miles from our city to the harbor. And if you want us to have a strong navy, we have to secure that road. And after a little bickering, the Dalian League was like, well, we see where you're coming from. This, even though this isn't technically your navy, this is going to protect your navy. So, okay, that's cool. We're cool with that. But then Athens took it one step farther. Athens started using this money not just for their walls or their navy, but instead decided to spend that money on the Parthenon and the Agora and all those fancy buildings you think of with ancient Athens. Yeah. And now these other city-states are like, now wait a minute. We didn't agree for our money to build your temples. We have temples we have to build too. And a lot of these city-states were angry with Athens. Now, some of these city-states still, even though they weren't happy with Athens, stayed in the Dalian League. Why? Because Athens is the richest area. And if you trade with Athens, you're going to be rich too. So do you want to have a war with Athens and possibly lose everything, or even win but destroy your best trading partner? Or are you going to let this go for a while? I mean, look at the United States. One of our biggest trading partners is China, right? Do we agree with everything China does? Absolutely not. But are we going to put our trade agreement with China at jeopardy over things that could be small, when frankly China helps us be wealthier? And by the way, we help make China wealthier too. It's a win-win. Some people would argue China wins a little bit more in that agreement than we do, but together in our trade agreement between the United States and China, we're both better off. Your iPads that you have, if you could take the case off of them and look on the back, since I have an iPhone, I can. There's little fine print that, honestly, I can't read in this room.
Assembled in China, it says it right.
What's it say?
Assembled in China.
Yeah, assembled in China, and it will also say that the parts are made in California. So they literally make the parts in California, send them to China. In China, they put them together, they send them back, and then Americans, Apple company, puts their software on it. Yeah. And Silicon Valley, California, and China, wherever they have this factory. And I used to know it, I forgot, so forgive me. It's not an important fact. It won't be on the test. But this factory in China, that town in China, is also better off. It's a win-win. But some people were like, no. Some of these city-states were like, no, that's enough. That's enough. We need a check against the power of Athens. And, of course, the question became, go ahead and go to the next slide. The question became, well, who can stand up to Athens? There was only one other city-state that was stronger, had a stronger army than Athens. Who was it? It was Sparta. But Sparta didn't have a very good navy. That's the problem. Sparta didn't have a very good navy. Sparta had a strong army, but a very poor navy. Athens had a strong navy, but a mediocre army, frankly. Athens' army was stronger than, like, Thebes, but they weren't stronger than Sparta. They weren't stronger than Persia. Sparta's army was stronger than Persia. That's because they were professional soldiers. And so the Greek world split up into two different worlds. The Peloponnesian League, which sided with Sparta, and the Delian League, which sided with Athens. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And actually, we can skip this slide and go straight to the map, so that's good. All right, let's take a look at this map real quick. And you guys are going to have to help me. Correct me if I say the color is wrong, okay? I am colorblind. This is either orange or red.
Orange.
Okay, we'll go with that. Orange. And those are the city-states. Those are the regions that allied with Athens. These are independent city-states that allied with Athens. Now, what color is this? Help me out.
Green.
Green. This
Dark green.
dark green color. If you look at the other side of the Aegean Sea, you'll see it's all over the place over there, right? These are city-states that formally merged to become part of the Athenian Empire. After the Persian War, since the Athenians freed them, they became part of Athens as well. So Athens was no longer just a small city-state. It actually became the country of Athens. But only citizens in the city-state of Athens got to vote in their democracy. That's important to point out. So all these Ionian Greeks, did they get to vote at the Agora in Athens? Oh, no way. Montreur contraire. I don't even speak French. That's probably pretty bad, but we'll go with it. Now look at this. This is either blue or purple.
It's like a purple.
Okay, we'll go with that. Purple-blue. These are city-states that lined themselves up with Corinth. And most of them are in this part of the peninsula, of the Balkan Peninsula. You know a peninsula can have a peninsula jutting off of it, right? A peninsula is a piece of land surrounded by water on three sides. So this large piece of land right here is surrounded by water on three sides, right? But if you look at the bottom of that, you have a peninsula jutting off that peninsula. You see it? That peninsula jutting off the Balkan Peninsula is called the Peloponnesian Peninsula. And that's where Sparta was. And city-states like Mantinea, and I may mispronounce a couple of these, so don't get too technical here. Mantinea, Corinth, Leuctra. They were city-states that lined themselves up with Sparta. Now, both of these city-states, Sparta and Athens, had also made colonies. So not on this map. If you go over to where Italy is, Italy looks like a boot kicking a soccer ball, right? Well, if you look at the heel, the very bottom of the heel of the boot, and if you look at the soccer ball is the island of Sicily. All of you in here probably have had Sicilian pizza before. If you live in Parkersburg, you probably have had Sicilian pizza. Maybe you haven't, but you probably have. Raise your hand if you've eaten at pizza place. Raise your hand if you've eaten at pizza place. Do you guys know that people travel across the East Coast to Parkersburg just for a pizza? We have a very unique pizza here with the pizza place. We also have a couple other unique places. We have DeCarlo's and we have Ruby's. So people that are really into pizza will literally travel to Parkersburg because we have a lot of different styles of pizza close to here. If you think about it. I mean, Parkersburg's only 29,000 people. Wood County is a little less than 100,000 people if you include, let me rephrase this, Wood County, Belpre, and Marietta. In other words, just right along the river. We're going to include them in this discussion, okay? Just on the other side of the river, Belpre, Marietta, in between there, okay? We'll include them in the discussion. If you think about it, there's a lot of good pizza places around here. You guys, if you've never left the area, You probably think that's just normal. If you've ever left the area, I lived in Lynchburg, Virginia one time for a year. And every time I came home, I wanted pizza. Like the 6th best pizza place here is as good as Lynchburg, Virginia pizza. Seriously. We have Pizza Place, DiCarlo's, Ruby's, Giovanni's, Smitty's, the original Pizza Place, which is up in Marietta. If you include Waterford, you have Jukebox Pizza, you have Doughboys Pizza. If you include Ravenswood, which isn't that far away from us, they've got Geno's, which is more of a New York style pizza. Pizza Place is known for their Sicilian style pizza. The guy that started Pizza Place, he just passed away about a year ago. He was from the island of Sicily, became an American citizen, and brought with him his recipe for making pizza. And so Parkersburg is known for Pizza Place pizza. Wheeling is known for DiCarlo pizza, but you can get DiCarlo's pizza here in Parkersburg, right? So a lot of people come to Parkersburg. It's one of the few things people don't know about. Our pizza tourist industry.
Wait, is Pizza Place like not common in other areas?
No. The only other place that I know a pizza place to be, there's one in, I'm wanting to say Meadowbrook Mall in the Fairmont area. I think. Don't quote me on that one. It might be somewhere else in the Fairmont area. But I think it's Meadowbrook Mall between Clarksburg and Bridgeport and Fairmont. I think that's where the pizza place is that way. There's one there. And believe it or not, there's a pizza place at Myrtle Beach that's linked to this one. And then the original pizza place, it's a different company, but it's the same recipe. And long story short, that's the one in Marietta. And I think there's one more, the original pizza place somewhere in Ohio. That's it.
There's 6 pizza places. I just looked it up.
You just looked them up. And there's one at the Grand Central Mall, obviously, right? And look up the original pizza place, too, because even though that's a different franchise, it's the same pizza. Basically, the guy sold his franchise and then started another place with just one word different, the original pizza place. But it's basically the same pizza, for the most part. They would argue they're different. We're not going to get into that. It's basically Sicilian-style pizza. Well, anyway, back to Sicily. Syracuse was in Sicily. And we talked about this before, but I'm going to review it. If you look at the state of New York, not the city of New York, the state. We're going to talk about both the city and the state. So this is the state of New York, and here's the city. This is the state, this is the city. And the Hudson River flows and empties into the Atlantic Ocean at New York City. And it flows through Albany, New York. So right there along the eastern edge of the state of New York is where most New Yorkers initially came to the United States. Either Albany or anywhere there in the Hudson River Valley, but especially New York City. Well, today we think of Syracuse, New York, which is right here in western New York. We tend to think of Syracuse as being on the East Coast. Why? Because our country stretches from sea to shining sea, right? But it didn't always do that, right? Syracuse, if this is the United States, Syracuse would have been in the West. So when the city of Syracuse was first founded, it was intended to be a college, a place for education in the West, which is now in the East, I know, but just stick with me, in the western part of New York, when most people lived in the eastern part of New York, right? Syracuse, the colony, is west of Sparta across the Adriatic Sea on the island of Sicily. So in a very real sense, Syracuse was named intentionally. It was the western outpost of the new America. in the 1700s. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Of course, now that's east because we moved clear across, but that wasn't in the 1700s. That was later. That's how Syracuse got its name. And Syracuse was a colony of Sparta. They're going to come into play later. What time do we get out of here?
12:45.
I'm going to try to get the rest of this done in 15 minutes. So I'll try my best. Next slide. Okay, this slide here, we're not going to have time for you to copy it right now. I'm going to put, but this PowerPoint is on Schoology, and I want you to make sure you know this slide and copy it down in your notes, okay? When we talk about the Peloponnesian Wars that was fought between Athens and Sparta, it's really more correct to say the Peloponnesian Wars. Some historians refer to it as the Peloponnesian War because it was one big long event. Some historians say the Peloponnesian Wars because there were times, for lack of a better way of saying it, that there was a break in the fighting. Do you guys know that some historians refer to World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II as one war? They call it the Second 30 Years' War. Okay? The Second 30 Years' War. Some historians see World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and the Cold War as all one big event. Because the Cold War could have ended in World War III, right? Miraculously, we avoided it. Because if we didn't avoid it, it would have been nuclear war. And that would have been the end of our world, right? Give me just a second, okay? Now, I'm going to point this out now. Phase 1, I like to call Greek World War I. The Greek World War I. The Greek world. Sometimes we refer to all the ancient Greeks together as the Greek world. I'll call Phase 1 Greek World War I. Phase 2, I like to call Greek World War II. And Phase 3, I like to call it Greek World War III. They had a World War III, didn't they? Their Greek World III. That was their world. Everybody that spoke the same language, same culture, they all went to war together. All right? And you're going to have to keep track of who won and where. So let's go through this, okay? Go to the next slide. These two superpowers make alliances, and all it's going to take is one of the alliances to go to war with somebody on the other side, and all the Greek world is going to be drawn in. Does that sound familiar to something you learned in 6th grade last year? Yeah, that's how World War I started. Do you see why I like to make this connection here? That's how World War I started. And what happened was, go ahead to the next slide. Corinth got upset with Athens about a conflict over trade. And Athens began blockading the Corinthians. By the way, if you ever read the Bible, Corinthians, that's the same Corinth, only like 500 years later. Okay? So this is 500 years before the Bible books, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And Corinth had an agreement with Sparta. Hey, Sparta, Athens is starting to fight us. We have an agreement. We've been paying you gold. Go kick their butts. And Athens was like, they're not going to agree to that because we're only fighting you on the sea. And Sparta said, oh, yes, we are. Next slide. That's oversimplified. But war is declared, and Athens and Sparta go to war for 10 years. 10 years. Go to the next slide, please. Now, for 7th grade, you do not need to know battle by battle of this war. It's 2,500 years ago. You don't need that. Fair enough? We're just going to sum it up this way. Athens had a better navy. So every time the battle was at sea, who won?
Athens.
Very good. And Sparta had a better army. Every time the battle was on land, usually who won? Sparta. However, Athens had a really cool wall that was protecting them. Remember that? Sparta couldn't cross it. They didn't have the technology to cross that big old wall. Donald Trump would have been very happy. Okay? So they didn't have the technology to get across the wall. And so one side always won on land. By the way, the farms are on land, right? So the farmers, they're going to have to leave the farms and live in the city of Athens. So Sparta just surrounds the city of Athens and makes sure they burn all the farms down and everything. So how's Athens gets food? Because Athens has control of the sea. And that wall went from their harbor to their city. So they could always buy food off other countries, like Egypt. Oh, we're starting to make connections to other places, aren't we? Yeah, we're starting to do that. This is all going to tie in together and come to a point by the end of the year. Sparta's navy was terrible, so they couldn't blockade Athens. At the same time, Sparta didn't need Athens. They didn't need to trade for their food. Their farmers were taking care of business. And the Athenian army wasn't doing a very good job of destroying Spartan farms. This happened for 10 years. Now, this is a stalemate. A stalemate means that no side is really getting a decisive victory over the other. There's a lot of people dying and not a lot of territory changing hands. One could argue Athens had the upper hand. And they did, except something happened. And there's a reason it happened. Let's take a look. Next slide. I don't know how I ended up back there, but I did. There we go. What slide is that there? Let's go to slide 10.
It doesn't say.
Oh,
yeah, it does.
Just stay right there. Stay right there. That's good. I'll go to there. Now, Pericles orders everyone from the surrounding farmlands inside the city walls, like we said. Let's go to the next slide. There's the bust of Pericles. He's like the general leader of Athens during the Peloponnesian Wars. Go to the next slide. However, could you imagine if Parkersburg's population overnight went from, let's go ahead and include the entire Mid-Ohio Valley region, of 30,000 to 100,000. Could you imagine if that happened overnight? Literally overnight. All the people who don't live inside of Parkersburg, and let's make it inside downtown Parkersburg only. And the reason I'm saying that is because they have a flood wall around it, right? So that gives you an idea about the size of Athens inside its walls. It's about the same. Imagine if everybody had to leave their homes and live inside of downtown Parkersburg overnight. It could be done, don't get me wrong. We could do it. But instead of a family having a house or a family having an apartment, every family would have to live in a room of one of those houses. And it's not like we magically all of a sudden get more bathrooms. So our sewage capacity is not designed for 100,000 people in downtown Parkersburg every day. It can handle that. It does that during homecoming. You guys realize that? There's over 100,000 people that come to Parkersburg and are going through Parkersburg during homecoming sometimes. So it's done it before. But it can't do that day after day after day after day after day after day. Do you see the problem? So what happens? You don't have enough toilets, so you have poor hygiene. And since we don't like to talk about this, but it's appropriate here, since our body wastes aren't being taken care of the proper way anymore, it leads to disease. And after 10 years of that, that's what happened in Athens. You had a plague. We don't know exactly what plague it was. We don't know if it was the Black Plague or some other plague. We don't know. What we do know is that a third of the Athenians died. 9 in 10 got sick. Over half of the ones that survived got so sick that they became very, very weak. And the Athenians felt like the gods were punishing them. Their confidence weakened. And go ahead and go to the next slide. And in 421 BC, they agreed to a truce with Sparta, because Sparta was having problems as well. So the Spartans and the Athenians get together and say, our war is at truce. It's not over. We'll start in 50 years. That gives both civilizations a chance to rebuild. Next slide, please. Well, Athens breaks the promise. But they don't attack Sparta directly. Instead, they attack two of Sparta's colonies. So let's go look at the next slide. And we're back to this. You see this? So Greek World War I, or Phase I, basically ends in a truce. It's supposed to last 50 years. It lasted 5. Because Athens was like, well, the colonies technically don't count. There's going to be 2 major colonies attacked during this second phase of Greek World War II. Melos and Syracuse, with very different results. So let's take a look at phase 2. Next slide, please. Athens attacks the island of Melos. Melos. M-E-L-O-S. Melos. Melos. I'm not going to pretend like I pronounce every word correctly. But here's the important thing that happened. The Athenians basically showed up and said, surrender or die. I'm paraphrasing. Okay? Because again, we're not going blow by blow through these battles. The people of Melos were like, well, I mean, it's been a long time since we've been Spartans, and we really don't have anything against you Athenians. Okay, we'll surrender. You can be our rulers. We don't have any problem with you. I mean, look at all the other city-states that you guys conquered. They're doing really well. And the Athenians went, well, about that surrender or die, surrender means die. And they killed all the men on the island of Melos. They killed them all. Slaughtered them. They took the women and children and sold them into slavery. Athens was feeling pretty big about itself. Yeah. See, we can beat those Spartan wannabes. But the Melos, the people of Melos really didn't want to fight. And they were unprepared for the battle. And they were distant from Spartan heritage over time. Yeah, they were descendants of the Spartans, but so much time had passed, they really didn't consider themselves Spartan anymore. So Athens wanted to expand westward across the Aegean Sea, and they attacked the colony of Syracuse. Without getting too technical, this is a big honking mistake. Next slide. They invade Sicily to conquer Sparta's ally and former colony, Syracuse. And the Syracusians rout them. They rout the Athenians. because Syracuse, unlike Sparta, had something that was good that Sparta did not. They live on an island. What do they need? Huh? Syracuse lives on an island. What do you need if you live on an island? You need boats, and you need good ones. And if you're a colony that's between two burgeoning countries, Carthage and Rome, which we'll talk about later, you're going to have to be able to defend yourself on the seas. So out of necessity, they learned to fight on the seas. And when the Athenians came, they thought they were like the Spartans. They had the fighting ethic of the Spartans, but they fought different than the Spartans. Namely, they could win at sea. And the Athenians were routed. Next slide, please. The naval fleet failed to destroy the walls around Syracuse. The Athenian fleet were defeated in Syracuse harbor, and they were forced to surrender. So next slide. And we're back to this slide again. Back to this slide. So the Athenians have been beat at sea, and their weakness is now exposed. And Sparta tells themselves, we have the right to declare war because Syracuse is our ally. And Athens has broken the truce. And Sparta wants this over with. But again, Sparta itself did not have a very good navy. Next slide. And even though Syracuse had a good navy, they could beat the Athenians around Syracuse. They weren't a strong enough navy to blockade mighty Athens in Athens. Next slide. There should be. All right, just listen. And so what ended up happening was the Spartans are going to turn to an old enemy as an ally. Guess who the Spartans turned to? Persia. They turned to Persia. And Persia, willing to get rid of these Athenians, don't put your stuff away yet, I'm not done, I've got 5 minutes. Okay. They turn to Persia, and Persia agrees to only fight at sea. And they agree only to blockade Athens. We're not going to attack Athens. We're just going to blockade Athens and not let food come in and out. That way those big Persian ships don't have to get close to the shore, do they? And Sparta, it's your job to take care of the rest. Sparta also had Syracuse on their side. And even though Syracuse didn't have a lot of ships, their ships were able to handle the coast around Athens. So the Syracusan ships were right around Athenian harbor. The Persian ships were well out at sea, but blockading Athens. And Sparta was causing problems in the countryside. And this lasted for 8 more years. Long story short, Athens never recovered. Sparta permanently occupied the Athenian countryside, took control of their silver mines, and made the 20,000 Athenian miners Spartan slaves. Sparta technically wins. But at what price? Athens would lose World War III, the Greek World War III, Phase 3 of the Peloponnesian Wars. But was Sparta better off? That answer is decidedly no, because after 30 years of war, Sparta, which was once a strong city-state, was now left weak. Most of their soldiers had died. And remember that Sparta was a slave civilization. Their soldiers were supposed to keep the slaves under their control. Now there aren't enough soldiers to do that. And it wouldn't take much. But by the early 400s, by 400 BC, Sparta itself will get beaten. But not by Athens, by little old measly Thebes. But Thebes wouldn't be in control much longer either. Because if we go back to that map that we looked at earlier, all the way back at the beginning, and could you go back to that map? I think it's slide 5. It might be slide 6. Just go back to that map. If we take a look at it, I want you to look at Macedonia. Let's take a look at Macedonia. It's slide 5. There we go. What color is this where Macedonia is? Help me out.
It's a light green.
It's a light green. Meaning they're not even part of this war. The Macedonians were kind of like the Americans, for lack of a better way of saying it, to Europe. They're kind of Greek. They called themselves Greek. But the Greeks said, well, they aren't real Greeks. Yeah, they're related to us, but they're like the distant cousin that nobody wants to claim, right? And by the way, the Americans, in Western civilization, the United States, we're kind of seen that way in Europe. I mean, we're not Europeans. We're people, most of us are people of European descent. Not all of us.
I'm German.
But Germany is a country in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? But long story short, after World War II, who's the dominant world power in the world? United States and Russia, which are kind of Western civilizations, but not like the rest of Europe, not the core of Europe. And who is going to end up conquering the Greek world? The Macedonians. And so that's why I see a lot of similarities and parallels between the Greek Peloponnesian Wars and the world wars of our time period. And if a pattern repeats itself over and over again, it answers a really important question. Why do we have to learn this stuff?
Maybe it doesn't happen again.
If it happens over and over, there's a good chance it could happen again. And if we don't like the result that pattern has created in the past, what we have to do is try to figure out a way to break that pattern. And to break that pattern, you have to have a knowledge of history. All right, guys, you were a great class. We'll simply leave it there.